On the 5th of May, 1821, as evening fell on a remote South Atlantic island, Napoleon Bonaparte's life ended. He was just 51. For 6 long years, the conqueror of Europe, a man who led armies of 600,000 and crowned himself emperor, wasted away as a captive on Street Helena. His British captors chose the Volcanic Outpost, a remote speck 1,200 miles from civilization, as his final, inescapable cage. He was confined to Longwood, a decaying, rat-filled home, under the constant watch of his guards. As a fierce storm battered the island and thunder cracked over the desolate landscape, the most formidable figure of his era died, attended only by a few loyal followers and his jailers. Officially, his death was due to the same stomach cancer that claimed his father. Whispers of arsenic poisoning would follow, but the reality was far more heartbreaking. The great Napoleon had lost the will to live. In his last months, he starved himself and argued with physicians, desperately dictating a legacy he could no longer command. Yet his passing was not an end, but the start of a new saga of sorrow, exile, and confinement for his family. Their story would become a sprawling tragedy of failed ambition and broken hearts spanning the globe. For Napoleon's legacy was not just a legend, it was a bloodline. He left a wife who had already found a new lover, and a young son he hadn't seen since toddlerhood, a boy he would never know as a man. His royal siblings were about to learn the heavy price of carrying the world's most celebrated and cursed name. His sole heir, Napoleon II, met his end at just 21. He wasted away as a captive in Vienna, dreaming of an empire he would never rule. His own mother, Marie-Louise, remarried almost immediately, bearing children for another. Joseph, once the King of Spain, lived out 2 decades banished to America. There, he erected a grand estate in New Jersey as his wealth slowly vanished. The youngest, Jerome, followed Napoleon's command to desert his American family, unknowingly starting a new branch of the dynasty in the United States. Decades on, just as the Bonaparte name was on the verge of restoration, tragedy struck again when his grandnephew, the Prince Imperial, was killed by 18 Zulu spears in South Africa. His death left his mother, Empress Eugenie, to grieve for the next 41 years. She became a phantom of the past, outliving her family and the memory of their empire's grandeur. The fate of Napoleon's heirs reveals a stark truth about empires forged in battle. A throne won by the sword offers no protection for the children who follow. To grasp the depths of their fall, one must first see the impossible heights they achieved. The Bonaparte family was not originally French. They hailed from Corsica, modest Italian aristocrats, on an island acquired by France the year before Napoleon's birth in 1769. His father was a simple lawyer, raising 8 children. Yet by 1804, the second son had made himself an emperor, elevating his entire clan to royalty. His mother, Letizia, took up residence in the grand Tuileries Palace. But she was never secure, saving money against a downfall she correctly predicted. His brother Joseph was installed as king first of Naples, then Spain, while his brother Louis ruled Holland. His youngest sibling Jerome became king of Westphalia, and his sisters were married off to princes to govern duchies. In less than 10 years, the Bonapartes rocketed from island obscurity to the zenith of continental power, and they embraced the lifestyle. Joseph's Madrid palace was filled with priceless art, while Jerome's spending was so reckless it drew Napoleon's own criticism. They possessed unimaginable riches and authority over millions, yet they had no real security. Their entire world was built upon one man, and he knew his empire was profoundly fragile. He desperately required an heir, a child his beloved first wife, Josephine, could not provide. So, in 1809, in a shared moment of heartbreak, he divorced her to marry Marie-Louise of Austria, the 18-year-old imperial princess. She was the grandniece of Marie Antoinette, and on March 20th, 1811, the cannons of Paris roared in celebration. 101 blasts declared the arrival of his son and heir, Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte, crowned the King of Rome from birth. Tears of joy streamed down his face. The dynasty was secure. The infant slept in a golden cradle worth 300,000 francs, a symbol of a life where he would lack nothing. A tragic misconception. Yet, this gilded cage had one fatal flaw. It relied completely on his father's battlefield triumphs. 1812 brought the disastrous Russian campaign of 600,000 men. Few returned, and his enemies regrouped. By 1814, Paris had fallen. Napoleon was exiled to Elba, and Marie-Louise took their young son and retreated to Vienna. He wrote constantly, but she seldom responded. Soon, she had taken a lover, a one-eyed Austrian general named Count Adam von Nieperg. While Napoleon was still breathing, she would marry the Count and bear him 3 children. His daring 1815 escape from Elba and triumphant march to Paris during the 100 days ultimately altered nothing. Then, at Waterloo, his fortune turned. With his army decimated, he surrendered to the British. His final prison was Street Helena, a remote volcanic speck in the South Atlantic, a place of no return. While the father spent his last days dictating memories of a lost son, that very son was being systematically stripped of his own identity. The Austrian court took everything. His title, King of Rome, was the first to go. Prince of Parma, heir to an empire, all gone. He was now just Franz, Duke of Reichstadt, a minor noble whose famous name held no real power. He was not permitted to speak French where others could hear. To appease his instructors, he spoke his native tongue with a put-on German accent, part of an education designed to erase France from his heart. They deliberately withheld the news of his father's death for several days. The court watched, coldly observing his reaction. He reportedly grew pale and asked for solitude. Though Bonapartists called him Napoleon II, he grew into a striking young man, blessed with his father's intense eyes and his mother's height. His instructors noted a serious, focused young man with an obsession for military affairs. He craved a soldier's life, perhaps secretly dreaming of reviving his father's lost empire. But the powers of Europe had one shared goal: to ensure another Bonaparte would never rise. He lived under constant watch, with Chancellor Metternich's spies embedded in his own household. His commission in the Austrian army was purely for show. He was denied any genuine command. In 1831, when his grandfather, the emperor, marched on Italy, Franz pleaded to go. He was denied. His very name was a spark, too dangerous to place near soldiers who might remember the emperor. When revolution ousted France's king in 1830, whispers arose of placing him on the throne. His father's loyalists made contact. For a moment, his destiny seemed within reach, but his body was already failing. He had contracted tuberculosis, and the disease was rapidly destroying his lungs. He became skeletal and pale, his constant coughing bringing up blood while his doctors could only watch, helpless. But consumption was incurable in 1832. On July 22nd, he died at Schönbrunn Palace, the same halls where his victorious father had once humbled Austria. He was just 21 years old. He had not seen France since childhood, never reigned as king, nor ever led men into battle. He left behind no heir, and was forbidden from even visiting his father's grave. 11 years after his father's lonely death, Napoleon's direct bloodline ended forever. His body was laid in Vienna's imperial crypt, the resting place of his captors, his heart and organs sealed in separate urns. For over 100 years, he remained in Austria, surrounded in death by the family that held him captive in life. Finally, in 1940, an order from Adolf Hitler brought his remains to Paris to lie beside his father. It was a calculated propaganda stunt, Hitler's supposed gift to a defeated France. Yet his heart and intestines are still in Vienna. Even in death, the son was never made whole with his father. His mother, Marie Louise, scarcely acknowledged his passing. She was consumed by her new life, ruling the Italian Duchy of Parma, having married her lover mere months after Napoleon's death in 1821. After Neipperg's death in 1829, she married again. Dying in 1847, she chose burial in Vienna, severing her final tie to Paris. She wanted to be free of the Bonapartes, but the name itself would not fade, thanks to Napoleon's brothers and their children. And some of those descendants were ambitious. After Waterloo, the eldest brother, Joseph, fled to America, his passage secured by a fortune plundered from the Spanish treasury during his brief rule as king. He started his American life quietly, backing the arts, but his ambition was much bigger. In 1816, he acquired a New Jersey estate called Point Breeze. It became his life's obsession, the most incredible private estate in America. He used a title to stay private, but everyone knew his true identity. His mansion was filled with masterpieces he had carried over from Europe. He possessed royal furniture, priceless art, and a library holding thousands of volumes. The estate featured French-style gardens, man-made lakes with swans, and aviaries of exotic birds. It earned comparisons to Versailles. The former king hosted 9-course feasts, served on solid silver. When his original home burned down in 1820, he simply built a larger one. He welcomed everyone from politicians to scientists and joined the American Philosophical Society. He was known as a polite, cultured, and generous man who loaned art to museums, but it was still in exile, watching from afar as his family faced tragedy. News that Napoleon had died reached him at Point Breeze in 1821. He reportedly vanished for days in grief, a sorrow deepened by his mother's death in 1836. By 1839, a wave of family deaths pushed him to return to Europe. He lost his daughter, his uncle, and then his sister, all in a short time. Joseph could no longer endure the distance from his remaining loved ones. He reconnected with his wife, Julie, in Florence, his own health rapidly failing. A series of strokes left him paralyzed, and on July 28, 1844, he died. He was 76, having spent almost 30 years living outside of France. His body was finally brought back to France, while his American estate was sold off. The great house was demolished in 1850, leaving just a whisper of a king's dream. Napoleon's youngest brother, Jerome, had what was maybe the most tangled fate. As a 19-year-old naval officer in 1803, Jerome came to America and was smitten by Elizabeth Patterson. She was the brilliant daughter of one of Baltimore's most prosperous merchants. Their Christmas Eve wedding in 1803 became a sensation in American society. The French ambassador skipped the event and immediately warned Napoleon. Napoleon was livid at his brother's impulsive and irresponsible act. Jerome had married for love, not strategy, and Napoleon refused to accept it. He ordered Jerome back to France, telling him to desert his American wife. Facing the loss of his family, title, and fortune, Jerome complied. He sailed for France in 1805, abandoning a pregnant Elizabeth. When she followed him to Europe, she was forbidden to set foot on any land Napoleon ruled. Turned away at every port, she gave birth to their son in London on July 7, 1805. She named the child for the father who had forsaken him. Napoleon had the marriage legally erased in France, claiming Jerome was underage. The Pope disagreed, declaring the union sacred and binding in the eyes of the Church. But Napoleon ignored the Pope's judgment. He forced Jerome into a strategic marriage with a German royal, Princess Catherine. As a prize, Napoleon made Jerome the king of a new German territory, Westphalia. He now governed a kingdom of 2 million people. He only saw Elizabeth again one time, a chance, silent passing in a gallery in 1822. Elizabeth, who insisted on using his name her entire life, held on to her bitterness for decades. She raised their son Beau between Baltimore and Europe, instilling in him the great expectations of his family name. A bitter, sharp-tongued fixture in European society, she waited in vain for the Bonapartes to recognize her or their child. They never did. Jerome's will in 1860 made no mention of his first marriage or American son. Elizabeth and her descendants received nothing. After losing a legal challenge in France, she died in a Baltimore boarding house in 1879, a 94-year-old miser surrounded by cash. Her fortune had grown to $1.5 million. She reportedly remarked that she'd once had everything but money, and now had nothing else. Her grandson, Charles Joseph Bonaparte, became President Theodore Roosevelt's Attorney General, helping create what is now the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The American Bonapartes made their mark, just not on the thrones Elizabeth had coveted. Jerome himself outlasted the First Empire's collapse, enduring the Bourbon Restoration, the July Monarchy, and witnessing the Second Empire's rise. Surviving most siblings, he saw the Bonaparte name regain power and return to Paris when his nephew, Louis Napoleon, became president, and then Emperor Napoleon III. He was showered with titles, including Marshal of France and President of the Senate. He was celebrated at lavish balls, a living connection to a bygone glorious era. He passed away at his Parisian chateau on June 24, 1860, at the age of 75. With the death of Napoleon's last brother, an even more dramatic chapter of the Bonaparte story was about to begin. It would be written by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor's nephew. Growing up in exile, Louis Napoleon watched his family scatter and his older brothers die prematurely. He was never meant to inherit power or influence. But with other heirs, either dead or uninterested in politics by 1832, he became the new hope for the Bonapartist cause. He was a highly improbable choice for emperor. He attempted 2 disastrous military coups, the first of which, in 1836, ended as a complete farce. His failure resulted in arrest, a short imprisonment, and exile to America. In 1840 he tried again, arriving with plotters and a trained eagle, only to fail spectacularly. He was captured, convicted of treason, and locked away in a fortress for 6 years. His 1846 escape, disguised as a workman, earned him a mocking nickname that his enemies used for the rest of his life. He appeared to be a laughable pretender, with grandiose delusions. But he grasped what his uncle knew. The French people were nostalgic for Napoleon. They desperately wanted a return to glory and an escape from the dull monarchy. When revolution toppled the king in 1848, he seized his chance, running for president of the new republic. His landslide victory of over 5 million votes utterly shocked his opponents. 3 years on, blocked from a second term, he launched a coup, overthrowing the republic to become dictator. 1 year later, in December 1852, he made himself Napoleon III, Emperor of the French. The nephew had reclaimed his uncle's throne, launching a dazzling 18-year reign for the Second Empire. Napoleon III transformed Paris, replacing medieval slums with the grand boulevards and monuments admired today. Baron Haussmann's work turned the city into the world's most modern capital. The emperor's glamorous palace balls attracted royalty from all over the continent. He grew France's colonial empire, built the Suez Canal, and seemed to have made the nation great again. He also found love, marrying the stunningly beautiful and fiercely devout Spanish Countess Eugénie de Montijo in 1853. She was no princess, and his advisors had urged a royal match. But Napoleon was smitten, and she would not be his mistress, leaving him the choice of marriage or nothing. In 1856, following a harrowing 2-day labor, Eugénie delivered a son, the Prince Imperial and heir to the restored dynasty. Cannons roared across Paris in celebration. Cheering crowds and ringing church bells across France suggested the Bonaparte succession was finally safe. But Napoleon III, echoing his uncle, made the tragic error of confronting a power he could not overcome. Bismarck's ruse worked. France declared war. A confident army marched. A disaster unfolded. The main force was surrounded. Napoleon III surrendered. He became a prisoner. Paris heard the news. The Second Empire fell. The Empress had to flee. She escaped to England. Her son was at her side. They waited in exile. The Emperor eventually joined them. His new life was quiet. He was broken and sick. He died in 1873. His empire was gone. But his son still lived. The promising Prince Imperial. He trained to be an officer. The Bonaparte heir. France kept watch. Even Queen Victoria cared. The prince craved real glory. He begged to go to war. His mother was terrified, but he was determined. The queen helped him go. He sailed for South Africa. A prince on the staff. His presence was a risk. He was assigned reconnaissance. On the 1st of June, he rode out eagerly. His patrol grew careless. They stopped to make coffee. No guards were posted. It was a fatal mistake. Zulu warriors attacked. His panicked escort fled. He fell from his horse. He stood to fight alone. His shots went wide. A spear found its mark. Trapped, he fought on with his spear, refusing to yield. Lances struck from all sides, finding his leg, arm, chest, and stomach. A warrior named Clevoa dealt the finishing strike, an assegai through the eye. When British soldiers found his body, it was bare, except for a gold chain with a Virgin Mary medal and his great-uncle Napoleon's seal. He had been pierced 18 times. His stomach was ritually opened, a Zulu custom to release a spirit from haunting its killers. The Zulus left his jewelry, acknowledging him as a courageous warrior who died fighting. At 23, he had never gone back to France or worn a crown. He never led an army, won a battle, married, or had children. With his fall, the Bonaparte dynasty's main line vanished, and the dream of a restored empire died on a distant South African hillside. The news destroyed Empress Eugenie. Having already buried her husband, she now had to bury her only child. The son she groomed to be Napoleon IV, destined to reclaim their glory, had perished in a pointless fight in a foreign war. It is said she was silent for days and wore mourning clothes for the rest of her years. In 1880, Eugenie journeyed to Zululand to visit the ground where her son had fallen. She knelt there, gathering dirt from the spot before erecting a stone cross for his soul. She then went back to England and withdrew entirely from public life. She relocated to Farnborough Hill and funded a grand abbey to house the remains of her husband and son, making St. Michael's Abbey her life's work. She gave to it generously and was a constant visitor after Napoleon III and the Prince Imperial were interred there. Eugenie would eventually join them, living for another 41 years. She grew close to Queen Victoria, even becoming godmother to one of her granddaughters who would later be Queen of Spain. She observed as the Third Republic took hold, and France turned against any idea of restoring the empire. She saw the Dreyfus affair tear her country apart. During the First World War, she gave her yacht to the British Navy and financed hospitals for the injured. She witnessed France withstand a German invasion, claim victory, and start to heal. At her death on July 11th, 1920, aged 94, she was the last surviving tie to the grandeur and tragedy of the Second Empire. After 50 years of grieving, she was laid to rest in Farnborough Abbey with her husband and son, where they all remain. The Bonaparte name continued, but only through the descendants of Jerome's second marriage. The current head of the Imperial House of France is Jean-Christophe, Prince Napoleon, born in 1986. He is Napoleon I's great-great-great-grandnephew. Holding an MBA from Harvard, he is employed in London's private equity industry. In 2019, he married a countess descended from the Habsburg and Bourbon lines, the very empires Napoleon fought to overcome. Their wedding took place at Les Invalides, with Napoleon's tomb in view. Their son, born in 2022, is named Louis, just like the young prince who fell in Zululand. The family no longer occupies palaces or commands armies. They attend events and speak with the press. They manage a website to honor their ancestors' memory. And while some followers still dream, France has been a republic for over 150 years. The imperial eagles have been put away. The crowns are secured in museums. The name that once struck fear across Europe is now a historical curiosity, a relic from a time when one man's will could change the world. Napoleon created an empire that ran from Lisbon to Moscow. He installed his brothers on thrones and arranged for his son to marry an emperor's daughter. He was convinced he was starting a dynasty to last for centuries, one that would rival Europe's greatest royal houses. Instead, his direct lineage ended just 11 years after he died, while his nephew's line was cut short in a Zulu ambush. His modern descendants are business people and scholars, not conquerors, highlighting the fragility of all royal dynasties. Their existence hinged on healthy heirs and loyal followers. Few families ever climbed as high as the Bonapartes, and few have fallen so precipitously, though they were not the only dynasty whose heirs faced an unknown future after losing power. For centuries, England's own monarchy fought over succession and power. To see the fate of one legendary king's children, a ruler who forever altered the nation's history and faith, just watch what became of Henry VIII's heirs.